It was Friday the 13th, and I was home alone. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a bad horror movie, right? But honestly, I wasn't scared. I've lived in this house for years, and sure, it's old and creaky, but that's just part of its charm. The floors groan when you walk on them. The pipes sometimes rattle, and every now and then, the wind makes the windows shake. It's the kind of stuff you get used to after a while. That night, I was sprawled out on the couch, half watching some show on Netflix while scrolling through my phone. The room was dim, lit mostly by the TV's soft glow, and everything felt normal. Until it didn't. I heard a loud thud. It came from the basement. That deep, hollow sound like something heavy had fallen over. My heart skipped a beat, but I brushed it off almost immediately. Old houses make noises, right? Maybe a box fell over, or maybe it was just the house settling again. No big deal. I tried to focus back on my phone, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The thud wasn't like the usual creaks or groans I was used to. It was louder, more deliberate. I sat up a little straighter, telling myself it was nothing. Probably just the wind. I muttered, though it sounded more like I was trying to convince myself. I turned the TV volume up, trying to drown out the creeping unease, but my ears were still tuned to every little sound in the house. Another creak, this time from the floor above. My eyes darted to the ceiling, but then I forced myself to look away. It's nothing, I told myself again, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Another thud, louder this time, closer. It came from the direction of the basement door, and that's when the uneasy feeling started to settle in like a knot twisting in my stomach. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. Had I locked that door earlier? I was sure I had. Or had I? The thud came again, and this time it felt intentional, almost like something or someone was trying to get my attention. My heart started beating faster, and the once comforting creaks of the house now felt like something else entirely. Something darker. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the bright beam cutting through the dim light of the room. Slowly, I got up from the couch, my legs feeling heavier with every step as I moved toward the basement door. The house seemed too quiet now, like it was holding its breath along with me. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded deafening, echoing in the silence. As I approached the door, I stopped and strained to listen, holding my breath. And that's when I heard it, breathing, faint but unmistakable, coming from the other side of the door. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the house. Someone was down there, or something. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle, turning it slowly, half expecting it to swing open. Locked. I exhaled in relief, leaning against the wall for a second to steady myself. Okay, good. I must have locked it earlier. It's fine. I'm fine. But just as I was about to step away, a soft, deliberate knock echoed from the other side of the door. The sound sent a jolt of terror through me, freezing me in place. It wasn't a random noise this time. It was purposeful, and whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew I was there. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the key, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that door as possible. But I couldn't ignore it, not anymore. I needed to know what was behind that door, who was down there, and what they wanted. With a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock, and with a soft, almost mocking click, the door unlocked. Slowly, I pushed it open, the hinges creaking as if they were trying to warn me to stop. The beam from my phone's flashlight cut through the thick, oppressive darkness, but it felt like it barely made a dent. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting something to lunge out of the shadows. But nothing moved. Just cold, empty air greeted me. Forcing myself forward, I stepped onto the first stair, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The basement was colder than usual, and the silence down there felt too heavy, like the air itself was thick with something unseen. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I took another step, then another. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered, casting the walls in eerie, shifting shadows. That's when I saw it. The basement window, small and normally locked, was wide open. The curtains fluttered lightly in the breeze, and I froze in place. Someone had been inside. Or worse, they were still here. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. The footsteps I had been hearing, were they upstairs, or had they come from right here all along? Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I spun around and bolted back up the stairs. My feet stumbled over each step, the pounding in my chest rising to my throat as I ran. I slammed the door shut behind me with a loud bang, my shaking hands quickly locking it once again. I pressed my back against the door, panting, trying to calm down. I was safe now, right? Then I heard it, the knock. But this time, it wasn't coming from the basement. It was right behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as a cold chill ran down my spine. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to see what was standing there, knocking so patiently, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. There's this old swing in the park behind my house. It's the kind of swing you'd see in an old, faded picture from the 70s. Rusted chains, a wooden seat that looks like it's seen better days. Honestly, I'm surprised it's still standing. No one ever uses it. I've walked past it countless times, and not once have I seen anyone brave enough to sit on it. It's always just there, silent, still, waiting. That Friday, the 13th, had been a long day at work. You know those days where you just need to clear your head? That was me. I figured a walk in the park would do the trick. It was getting late, and the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting this soft, orange glow over everything. The park was empty, as it usually was in the evening. Just me, a few scattered trees, and that old swing. I didn't think much of it as I walked past the swing. The creaking of the chains was something I'd heard 100 times, especially when the wind picked up. But this time, something was different. The swing wasn't just creaking, it was moving. Not a gentle sway, either. It was swinging back and forth, slow but steady, like someone had just gotten off it. Here's the thing, there was no wind, not even a breeze. The trees around me were still, the air completely calm. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the swing. My mind raced for a logical explanation. Maybe I missed a gust of wind? Maybe some kid had been playing on it a minute ago, and I just didn't see them leave? I laughed under my breath, trying to shake off the sudden chill creeping up my spine. Weird coincidence, I muttered to myself. But deep down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. Something about the way the swing moved. It felt off. Too deliberate. Too intentional. I kept walking, forcing myself to move on, but I couldn't stop glancing back. The swing was still moving. The creaking of the swing grew louder, the rusty chains groaning with each back and forth motion. I had only taken a few steps away, but the sound was relentless, almost like it was demanding my attention. Slowly, I turned around, expecting the swing to have slowed down. Instead, it was moving faster. The wooden seat, which had barely been swaying before, now swung higher and higher, slicing through the air like someone had given it a hard push. I stopped in my tracks, my eyes fixed on the swing as it picked up speed. The wind? No. The air was still, dead silent around me. My heart started to beat faster. Okay, that's creepy. I muttered under my breath, trying to brush off the rising unease. But it wasn't just creepy anymore. It was wrong. As I stood there, frozen, something cut through the silence. A sound that didn't belong. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. Giggling. The kind of giggling you hear from kids when they're playing, carefree and happy. Except, there were no kids around. The park was completely empty. I scanned the area, my eyes darting between the trees and benches. Nothing. No one. Just the swing, still moving, faster now. My chest tightened as the giggling grew louder, echoing in the empty park. My pulse quickened, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground, eyes glued to that swing as it kept going, back and forth, faster with each pass. That's when I realized it wasn't just swinging higher. It was moving like someone or something was sitting on it. The seat dipped lower on one side, the chains pulling tight as if underweight. The creaking of the rusted metal matched the rhythm of a child's laughter. My throat tightened as I watched, unable to tear my gaze away. I took a shaky step backward, my hands trembling. I needed to leave. Now, whatever was happening, it wasn't normal. But as I turned to go, I could still hear it. The soft, echoing laughter lingering in the air, following me. I took another step back, but I couldn't look away from the swing. It was still moving, impossibly high now, cutting through the air like it was alive. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. The giggling had faded, but the eerie creaking of the chains kept pulling at my nerves, getting under my skin. That's when I saw them. Small, delicate footprints in the dirt beneath the swing. At first, they seemed to blend into the ground, almost invisible in the fading light. But as I stared, they became clearer. Tiny footprints, as if a child had been running through the park. The trail led away from the swing and directly toward me. My blood ran cold. I looked around again, desperate to see anyone who could have made those prints. But there was no one. The park was empty. Just me, the swing, and those chilling little marks in the dirt. My heart pounded in my ears, the weight of the moment sinking in. I wasn't alone. Something had been there, and maybe still was. The footprint stopped just a few feet in front of me, like whoever or whatever had been walking had disappeared into thin air. My breath came in short gasps as panic set in. I didn't wait for another sign. I didn't want to know what was behind those invisible footsteps or the swing that wouldn't stop. I turned and ran, sprinting across the park, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The swing's creaking followed me, growing fainter with each step, but it was still there. Always there. When I got home, I slammed the door behind me, my heart still racing. I locked every window, drew every curtain, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Hours passed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the sight of that swing and those footprints over and over. Curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know. I got up, pulled the curtain aside, and peered out the window toward the park. My heart nearly stopped. The swing was still moving. Not swaying lightly in the breeze, but swinging, just like before, back and forth, higher and higher. But this time, it wasn't facing the park. It was facing my house. It was late, and I was completely drained. You know those nights when you're too tired to even get off the couch? That was me. I was halfway through some random movie on Netflix, barely paying attention, just zoning out. My eyes were starting to get heavy when my phone buzzed on the coffee table, cutting through the soft glow of the TV. I glanced at it. Unknown number. For a second, I debated whether I should even bother picking it up. Who calls this late anyway? It was probably a scammer or one of those automated calls, but curiosity got the better of me. I sighed, reached for the phone, and swiped to answer. Hello? At first, there was nothing, just silence. I waited, pressing the phone tighter against my ear, straining to hear anything. Then there was breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, like someone was deliberately making sure I heard it. I frowned, my skin prickling slightly. Hello? I said again, a little louder this time. Still nothing, just that creepy breathing on the other end. I rolled my eyes, feeling a mix of annoyance and unease creeping up my spine. Probably just some jerk playing a prank. I hung up, tossing the phone back onto the table with a frustrated sigh. Staring at the TV, I tried to focus on the movie again, but my mind kept drifting back to the call. I convinced myself it was nothing, just some random weirdo who had dialed the wrong number. No big deal, right? But then, barely 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. Unknown number. Same one. I grabbed it, feeling a surge of irritation now. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone up to my ear. Who is this? I snapped, expecting silence or maybe more of that creepy breathing. For a moment, there was nothing, and then a voice, soft, low, almost like a whisper. I'm watching you. My heart skipped a beat, the words sending a chill down my spine. I froze, gripping the phone tighter, the exhaustion I had felt moments ago replaced by a rush of adrenaline. I looked around the room instinctively, but everything was just as it had been. Dim, quiet, the TV flickering in the background. Who the hell is this? I asked again, trying to sound more angry than scared. But there was no answer, just a long, deliberate pause. Then the call ended. I froze, my mind racing. That voice, those words, kept echoing in my head. I'm watching you. I told myself it was just some idiot playing games, but the chill creeping up my spine wouldn't go away. Slowly, I scanned the room, trying to shake off the paranoia. That's when I saw it. The living room window, wide open. My breath caught in my throat, and I shot up from the couch, my heart hammering in my chest. I never leave that window open, especially not at night. The cool breeze was drifting in, rustling the curtains slightly, and I could feel the cold night air on my skin. I darted over, my fingers fumbling as I slammed it shut, locking it tight. My hands were shaking as I gripped the latch, pulling it down again, just to be sure. How long had it been open? Had someone been watching me this whole time? My mind swirled with fear and confusion. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe I forgot to close it earlier. But no, that wasn't right. I always checked. The thought gnawed at me, but I shoved it down, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Then my phone rang again. The screen lit up with that same unknown number, and my stomach dropped. I stared at it for a second, my instincts screaming at me to ignore it. But something inside me compelled me to pick it up like I had to know what they were going to say next. With a trembling hand, I answered. "Hello." My voice was barely a whisper, my mouth dry. There was a pause. Then the voice came through again, calm, almost amused. "You're wasting your time." I felt my throat tighten. I'm already inside. A cold wave of terror washed over me, and I backed away from the window, scanning the room wildly. My heart pounded in my ears, every beat louder than the last. I could hear the voice in my head, repeating over and over. Asterisk already inside. Already inside. Asterisk. I rushed to the front door, my hands shaking as I grabbed the handle. Locked. I checked the back door. Locked too. I ran to the kitchen, pulling open drawers, searching for anything, a knife, something, anything to defend myself. My fingers brushed against the cool steel of a blade, and I gripped it tightly, the weight of it doing little to calm my nerves. I checked the windows, each one, all locked. Every door, every entry point was sealed. I should have felt relief, but that knot of dread in my stomach only tightened. Something wasn't right. I knew it. The house felt too still, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. And then I noticed the faintest creak coming from upstairs. I bolted up the stairs, the adrenaline pumping through me like fire. My mind was racing, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. I felt like I was moving in slow motion, my legs heavy as I climbed, the weight of fear pressing down on me. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it, but now it seemed ominous, as if something waited for me on the other side. I threw the door open and grabbed the baseball bat from the corner, gripping it tightly in my sweaty hands. I was shaking, my knuckles white as I held onto it like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. I swept through the room, checking every corner behind the door, under the bed. Nothing. My heart pounded in my ears, the rush of blood deafening. I forced myself to check the other rooms, going through each one methodically. Bathroom, empty. Guest room, empty. Hallway closet, empty. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That gnawing sense that someone was watching me, waiting. My chest tightened as I stood in the middle of the hallway, the silence of the house pressing in on me from all sides. Just as I was about to retreat downstairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I nearly dropped the bat in surprise. Slowly, I pulled the phone out, hands trembling as I glanced at the screen. A new message. No number. Just the words, "Check your closet." A cold wave of terror washed over me. My stomach dropped, my knees feeling weak. How did they know? How could they possibly know where I was, what I was doing? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was a sick prank. Maybe I had imagined everything. But I knew better. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned toward the closet door. It loomed in front of me, the same as always, just an ordinary closet. But now it felt like something else, something dark, something hiding. The air was thick with tension, my breath coming in shallow bursts as I stepped closer. The door creaked as I slowly pulled it open, the dim light from the bedroom spilling inside. I held my breath, ready to swing the bat at the slightest movement. But nothing. It was empty. My clothes hung neatly, shoes piled on the floor. Just a regular closet. I exhaled, my body sagging with relief. But that feeling of dread didn't leave me. Something was still wrong. I stared at the inside of the closet, my eyes scanning every inch, every shadow. And that's when I saw it. The vent. It was small, hidden near the bottom corner, where most people wouldn't even notice it. But now it was slightly ajar, the cover hanging loosely, barely attached. I crouched down, heart pounding in my ears as I peered inside. The darkness seemed to stretch back farther than it should, like it went deep into the walls of the house. The air inside was cool, damp, and I could swear I heard the faintest rustle of movement from within. I wasn't alone. There was something or someone in the walls. I rented a lake house with a few friends for the weekend, a getaway to escape the city and just relax by the water. It was supposed to be fun, a chance to drink, laugh, and unwind. The place looked perfect online, a cozy cabin nestled in the woods, with a private dock and a pristine lake stretching out in front of it. But the moment we arrived, something felt off. The air was heavy, thick with humidity, but there was more to it than that. The lake itself. It just seemed wrong. You know how lakes usually feel alive? You hear the soft lapping of water, birds chirping, maybe even see a fish jump now and then. But not this one. The water was still, like glass, eerily motionless. There were no ripples, no sound, no birds flying overhead, no fish breaking the surface. It was like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something. We joked about it at first, saying maybe the fish were taking a vacation too. But deep down, I think we all felt the same unease gnawing at us. That first night, after we'd settled in, we sat around the fire pit outside, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Someone brought up that it was Friday the 13th, and we all started cracking jokes about the bad luck that could come our way. You know, typical stuff, serial killers in the woods, haunted cabins, the whole Jason Voorhees thing. We laughed it off, pretending like we weren't a little freaked out by the silent lake staring back at us. Then one of my friends, Greg, always the one to push things, dared me to go down to the dock alone. "Come on, man, it's no big deal," he said, smirking. "If you're not scared, go check it out." Being the tough guy, I shrugged it off. Whatever, it's just a dock. I'm not scared of some quiet water. I shot back, though inside, I couldn't shake the weird vibe the lake was giving off. Still, I wasn't about to back down. I grabbed a flashlight, tossed a quick glance at the group, and made my way down the dirt path toward the dock. As I walked, the air felt even heavier, like the humidity was pressing down on me. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off the trees and casting long, distorted shadows. The lake came into view, black and still, reflecting the night sky like a mirror. I reached the dock, the old wood creaking under my footsteps as I stepped onto it, my breath catching in the silence. There was no wind, no sound, just that unsettling stillness. I stood at the edge of the dock, staring out at the water, waiting for something, anything, to move. But the lake remained perfectly still. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting my friends to be watching from the cabin, laughing at how ridiculous this dare was. But I couldn't see them. The trees had swallowed up the cabin, leaving me completely alone in the dark. A shiver ran down my spine, and I tried to laugh it off. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. "It's just a lake. There's nothing out here." But the more I stared into that endless black water, the more uneasy I felt. I stood there, at the very edge of the dock, staring out at the water, which remained unsettlingly calm. The beam from my flashlight barely reached the lake, the light reflecting off its still surface. It was like looking into a void, a vast, bottomless pit that seemed to swallow everything. My breath hung in the air, the silence thick and oppressive, like the entire world had paused. That's when I saw it. A ripple, just a tiny disturbance, a small circle that appeared in the middle of the lake. It was so subtle that I almost missed it, but it was there, breaking the unnerving stillness of the water. My heart skipped a beat, the uneasy feeling creeping back up my spine. I squinted, trying to make out what had caused the ripple. A fish? Maybe, but I hadn't seen or heard any signs of life in that lake since we arrived. I took a step closer, leaning forward, trying to peer deeper into the black water. As I stood there, straining to see something, anything beneath the surface, I heard it. A voice. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It came from the water, whispering through the darkness, carried on the faintest breeze. My name. Someone was calling my name. Come closer. I froze, my heart racing in my chest, the blood draining from my face. I looked around, scanning the shoreline and the trees, expecting to see one of my friends hiding nearby, pulling some kind of prank. But there was no one. The cabin was far out of view, and the voice, it had come from the water. Come closer. It was so faint, so delicate, but it was there. A whisper, beckoning me forward, drawing me in. My mind screamed for me to turn around, to run back up to the cabin and forget this whole thing. But my body didn't listen. My feet felt rooted to the spot, and despite the growing dread gnawing at me, I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the spot where the ripple had appeared. I moved closer to the edge of the dock, so close that the tips of my shoes touched the old, rotting wood. My flashlight flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows over the water. I peered into the blackness, waiting, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. Then, without warning, something cold shot up from the water and wrapped around my ankle. It felt like icy fingers, tightening with a grip so strong that it took my breath away. Before I could even process what was happening, I was yanked toward the edge of the dock, my feet slipping out from under me. My flashlight flew from my hand, clattering onto the dock, the beam spinning wildly as I tried to catch myself. I screamed, my body flailing as I tried to pull away, but the grip only tightened, dragging me closer and closer to the water. The cold was unbearable, seeping through my skin, paralyzing me with its intensity. I kicked and thrashed, digging my fingers into the wooden planks of the dock, desperately trying to hold on. The voice whispered again, closer now, almost mocking. Come closer. I pulled with all my strength, my nails scraping against the rough wood, splinters stabbing into my skin. The water's edge was only inches away, the black surface rippling with every desperate struggle I made. Whatever had me wasn't letting go. Summoning every ounce of strength, I kicked hard, yanking my foot free from the icy grip. I scrambled back, gasping for air as I dragged myself away from the edge, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst from my chest. I looked down at my ankle, where the skin was red and raw, marked by something that felt too real to be a hallucination. I glanced back at the water, expecting to see something, a hand, a figure, anything that could explain what had just happened. But there was nothing, just the lake, still and black, as if it had swallowed whatever had tried to drag me under. But I could still hear it, faint and distant, that voice whispering my name. I barely managed to yank my leg free from whatever had grabbed me. My ankle throbbed with pain, and I was shaking so hard I could barely keep myself upright. I didn't even look back, I just ran. I sprinted down the dock, the old wooden planks creaking beneath my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest, pounding in my ears as I made a beeline for the cabin. When I reached the door, I burst inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against it, struggling to catch my breath, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. My friends, who had been lounging around in the living room, looked up at me confused. "Dude, what the hell happened?" Greg asked, raising an eyebrow as I collapsed onto the nearest chair. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How do you explain something like that? How do you tell your friends that something from the lake tried to drag you into the water? I forced the words out, my voice shaking. Something grabbed me. From the lake. I don't know what it was, but it was cold, and it whispered my name. They stared at me for a second, then burst out laughing. "Oh, come on, man. Are you serious?" Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "You probably just tripped on a rock or something. You've been watching too many horror movies." My other friends chimed in, making jokes about Jason coming to get me or how I must have had too many beers. I wanted to argue, to scream that it wasn't in my head, that it was real. But the more I tried to explain, the more ridiculous it sounded, even to me. Their laughter only made the knot of fear in my stomach tighten. I opened my mouth to speak again, to try and convince them, when a sound cut through the room, a loud splash from the lake. The laughter stopped. We all froze, our heads snapping toward the windows that overlooked the dock. The night was quiet now, the laughter replaced by a suffocating silence. The lake was hidden by the darkness, but the sound we had just heard was unmistakable. Something had splashed, and it wasn't a small fish or a breeze on the water. It was big. Greg stood up slowly, his cocky smirk fading. Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice shaky. Before anyone could answer, we heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate echoing on the dock. The old wood creaked under the weight of something moving toward the cabin, each step getting louder, closer. My skin prickled with fear, the sound confirming what I had been afraid of all along. Whatever had grabbed me was coming for us. Panic set in. "Lock the doors!" I shouted, rushing to the nearest window and slamming it shut. My friends snapped into action, their earlier disbelief gone, replaced by wide-eyed terror. They bolted to the doors and windows, locking everything as fast as they could. We huddled in the center of the room, every creak and groan of the house sending our hearts racing. The footsteps on the dock stopped, but the tension in the air didn't ease. We waited, breathless, our eyes darting to the windows, expecting to see something. But the only thing we could hear now was the eerie silence of the night. The hours dragged by, none of us daring to speak. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we sat in the dark, too afraid to move. The footsteps never returned, but the fear lingered, thick and heavy. When the sun finally rose, we slowly, cautiously made our way outside. The daylight should have brought comfort, but what we saw only deepened the dread. The dock was destroyed. The planks were ripped apart, jagged wood jutting out in every direction, as if something had crawled out of the lake and clawed its way toward us. Pieces of the dock were floating in the water, scattered, and the muddy footprints on the broken boards made one thing clear. Whatever had come out of the water had been looking for us. I've always hated mirrors. I don't know what it is about them, but they've always given me the creeps. There's something unsettling about seeing yourself reflected back. Like, what if the reflection isn't exactly you? I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's just one of those irrational fears I've had since I was a kid. I would avoid looking at mirrors too long, especially at night. You can call it paranoia, but I've always felt like there's something wrong about them. So when my roommate, Sarah, brought home this massive antique mirror on Friday the 13th, I wasn't exactly thrilled. She picked it up at some estate sale and was totally gushing about how vintage and elegant it was. The thing was huge, tall, with a thick, dark wooden frame that looked like it belonged in a haunted mansion. The glass was old too, with that slightly cloudy, warped look that made everything reflected in it seem just a little off. "Isn't it awesome?" Sarah beamed as she propped it up in the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. I forced a smile, trying not to let my discomfort show. "Yeah, it's something. Come on, it gives the place character," she said, laughing as she hung it up. I watched her struggle to get it into place, the heavy frame creaking as it settled onto the wall. As much as I wanted to protest, I didn't. It was her mirror, after all, and I didn't want to seem like a baby about it. But the thought of that mirror staring back at me every time I walked down the hall, it made my skin crawl. That night, I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth and trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had been nagging me ever since she brought the mirror home. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just an old piece of furniture and nothing more. But I couldn't help it. Every time I walked past it, I felt this weird pull, like it was silently demanding my attention. After brushing my teeth, I stepped out of the bathroom and glanced at the mirror. I was alone in the hallway, but something about seeing my reflection in that old glass made my stomach twist. The light overhead flickered for a second, casting weird shadows on the walls. I looked at myself in the mirror, same old me, tired, ready for bed. But then I noticed it. My reflection wasn't quite right. At first, I thought it was the old glass, how it distorted things slightly. But no, it was something else. The reflection of me was slower, like there was a split-second delay between my movements and the reflection's response. When I blinked, it blinked a moment after. When I turned my head, it lagged behind, as if it was watching me. Waiting, I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I raised my hand slowly, and my reflection did the same, but just a little too late. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead as I stared at the mirrored version of myself. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was studying me like it knew I'd noticed something was wrong. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. But as I stood there, staring at the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that my reflection wasn't me anymore. It felt like it was someone or something else. I tried to brush it off. Really, I did. I told myself it was just my imagination getting the better of me. After all, I'd never liked mirrors, and this one had an especially creepy vibe. But over the next couple of days, things got worse. Every time I walked past that damn mirror, I felt it. This strange, unshakable pull, like it was daring me to look. And every time I gave in and glanced at it, my reflection was wrong. It wasn't blatantly obvious, but it was enough to mess with my head. I'd walk past and catch a glimpse of myself, and for just a split second, I'd see it. My reflection would move just a little too slow. It was like watching a delayed video of myself, like there was some kind of glitch. I'd raise my hand to brush back my hair, and I'd notice my reflection mimicking the movement just a fraction of a second later. Subtle, but enough to freak me out. I kept telling myself it was the old glass. It had to be. Maybe the warping was causing some weird visual effect. But the longer it went on, the more paranoid I became. It felt like my reflection was doing it on purpose, like it wanted me to notice the delay. And that thought chilled me to the bone. I tried talking to Sarah about it one morning. We were both in the kitchen, making coffee before work, and I casually mentioned how the mirror was giving me the creeps. She looked at me with this playful smirk, stirring her coffee. "What, the old mirror? Come on, it's just a piece of glass." "No, seriously," I insisted, leaning against the counter. "There's something off about it. Every time I look, my reflection is delayed. It doesn't move right." She chuckled, shaking her head. "You're imagining things. That mirror's like 100 years old. It's probably just the warped glass messing with you. Relax." I tried to laugh it off with her, but deep down, her words didn't help. "Yeah, maybe you're right." I mumbled, though I didn't believe it. That night, I tried not to look at the mirror as I passed it on the way to bed, but the urge was almost overpowering. I forced myself to walk faster, my eyes straight ahead, refusing to glance at the hallway where it hung, looming like some ancient, silent predator. I made it to my room and shut the door behind me, feeling a strange sense of relief, like I had just dodged something terrible. I lay in bed, tossing and turning. The image of that delayed reflection burned into my mind. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off into a restless sleep. But then, in the dead of night, something woke me. A sharp, brittle sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. Glass cracking. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart thundering in my chest. The sound had come from the hallway, right where the mirror was. My room was dark, save for the faint light creeping in through the window. And for a moment, I debated whether to check or stay safely tucked under the covers. My brain screamed at me to stay put, but my body moved on its own, driven by some morbid curiosity. I crept to the door, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Slowly, I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I peered into the hallway. The mirror sat there, unmoving, its massive frame casting long, eerie shadows in the dim light. But there, at the center of the glass, a crack. It snaked across the surface, thin and jagged, as if something had tried to break through from the other side. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, my eyes glued to the crack. I didn't want to get too close, but I couldn't help myself. And that's when I saw it. My reflection. It was still, not moving, not mimicking me, just standing there, staring back at me, frozen in place. Except, I wasn't frozen. I stood at the threshold of my bedroom, heart pounding, eyes locked on the mirror in the hallway. Something was wrong. Very asterisk wrong. The crack I had seen moments ago had spread, splintering into a web of jagged lines. And then, in the dim light, I realized it wasn't just a crack anymore. The mirror was shattered. My breath hitched as I stepped into the hallway, the floor beneath my feet creaking as I moved closer. Pieces of glass littered the hardwood floor, glinting in the faint light from the living room. My hands trembled as I looked at the broken shards scattered everywhere. The once imposing antique mirror had completely fallen apart, its reflective surface now lying in fragments at my feet. But the worst part? My reflection, it was gone. Where there should have been my image, staring back at me from the shattered pieces, there was only empty space. The fragments of glass were no longer reflecting anything, just black, empty voids where my reflection should have been. I knelt down, carefully reaching toward one of the larger shards. I could feel my pulse racing, my fingers shaking as I hovered over the glass. Something inside me told me not to touch it, that whatever had just happened wasn't natural. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see. I picked up a shard, its jagged edge cool against my fingertips. I held it up to the light, turning it in my hand, expecting to see my reflection finally appear. But there was nothing, just blackness, like the glass wasn't reflecting anything at all. That's when I saw it. Something moved, just for a split second, in the corner of my eye. A flicker in the broken glass, like a shadow shifting. My heart raced as I looked closer, my face inches from the shard. And there it was, a hand, pale, thin, and distorted by the broken pieces of glass, but unmistakable. It was reaching out from the other side. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I watched the hand twitch and curl, its long fingers pressing against the inside of the shard as if it were trying to break through. I stumbled back, dropping the piece of glass, my heart hammering in my chest. It hit the floor with a sharp clink, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the rest of the shattered mirror. The hand was still there, moving, writhing, and then another one appeared, and another. My stomach churned as more hands, dozens of them, began to press against the surface of the broken shards, their long, bony fingers scraping against the edges of the glass, trying to push their way out. The faint sound of nails on glass filled the air, like a quiet, eerie scratching that made my skin crawl. I backed away, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. But the hands, they were real, and they were trying to get out. Suddenly, one of the shards moved. It shifted, as if something had bumped into it from the inside. And then, with a loud crack, a piece of the mirror split even further, a long, jagged fracture running through it. The glass trembled, as if whatever was on the other side was pushing harder, more desperately now. I had to get out. I had to move. But before I could run, the air grew colder, the temperature in the hallway dropping sharply. I could see my breath in front of me, fogging up in the freezing air. The scratching sounds grew louder, more insistent, the hands pressing harder, clawing at the glass. And then, the mirror's surface began to ripple. Like water, the shards started to shift and warp, bending impossibly as the hands pushed through, emerging further, pale and ghostly in the dim light. I took one last look at the dark, swirling void in the broken mirror, at the countless hands that were now reaching out, grasping. And then I ran. I didn't care where. I just ran away from the mirror, away from whatever had crawled out of it. And as I turned the corner, I heard the sound I had been dreading all along. The sound of something stepping through. It was late, really late, on Friday the 13th, and I was driving home along a stretch of highway that always felt a little too empty. You know the type. Long, dark, with only the occasional flicker of headlights from a car passing the other way. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes you question if your eyes are even open or if you're just steering on instinct. I'd been working late, trying to meet a deadline, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget about the world for a while. The road ahead stretched out into darkness, my headlights casting long shadows that seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. Everything was so still. No cars, no streetlights, not even a sign of life in the fields that ran alongside the highway. Just me, my car, and the occasional eerie rustling of the wind. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought my tired brain was playing tricks on me. There, on the side of the road, was a figure. A man, standing perfectly still, his thumbs sticking out, signaling for a ride. He was hunched over slightly, like he'd been waiting for hours, his clothes dark and ragged, barely visible in the dim light of my headlights. Normally, I wouldn't stop. I mean, who picks up hitchhikers anymore? Especially at this hour, especially on a night like this. But there was something about him, something desperate. He wasn't your typical hitchhiker stereotype. He didn't look dangerous, just tired, worn down like he'd been through something rough. I slowed down without even thinking, pulling over to the side of the road. My mind was already questioning why I was doing this, why I was taking a chance, but it was too late. He walked toward the car as soon as I came to a stop, his steps slow and deliberate, like he didn't have the energy to move any faster. When he opened the passenger door and climbed in, he smiled weakly, as if he couldn't believe his luck. "Thanks, man. Thanks a lot," he said, his voice quiet but filled with relief. "You don't know how much I needed this." I nodded, trying to act casual even though my heart was racing. "No problem," I mumbled, pulling back onto the road. For the first few miles, the guy didn't say much. He just sat there, staring out the window into the darkness, his hands resting on his lap, fingers fidgeting nervously. His clothes looked worn, like they'd seen better days, and there was a faint smell of dirt and rain, like he'd been outside for longer than he should have been. I tried to make small talk. "Where you headed?" He glanced over at me, his eyes dark and tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "Just anywhere," he replied vaguely, turning back to the window. "Anywhere but here." I didn't push it. I figured he had his reasons, and I wasn't in the mood to pry. The silence between us stretched on, and I could feel the unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Something about the way he sat there, so still, so quiet, made the air in the car feel heavier. About 20 minutes into the ride, he finally spoke again, his voice low, almost like he was talking to himself. "Do you believe in ghosts?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at him, unsure if he was serious or just trying to make conversation. His expression was blank, still staring out the window, but there was something strange in his tone, something off. I forced a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. "Not really. Never seen one, so I guess I don't have a reason to." He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he turned to look at me, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made my skin crawl. "I have," he said quietly. "I've seen them. They're everywhere. You just have to know where to look." A chill ran down my spine, and suddenly the car felt a lot smaller. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked back out the window, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. "You'll see soon enough," he murmured. And for the rest of the ride, he didn't say another word. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease settling in my gut. "Ghosts, huh?" I said, my voice sounding more nervous than I wanted it to. "Well, I guess you're not the first person to believe in that kind of stuff." He didn't laugh. He didn't even crack a smile. Instead, he kept staring out the window, his eyes fixed on something far away, something I couldn't see. The silence stretched on for a few seconds too long, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening with every passing mile. "They're real, you know," he said, his voice low and serious, like he was sharing some dark secret. "Especially out here on this road." My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I glanced at him. There was something about the way he said it that sent a shiver down my spine. I'd picked up hitchhikers before, people down on their luck, looking for a ride, but this guy was different. There was an edge to him, a kind of quiet intensity that made me uneasy. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The shadows played tricks on his features, making his hollow eyes seem darker, sunken. His hands, resting in his lap, were trembling, his fingers twitching slightly. He looked scared. I tried to shrug it off, forcing myself to stay calm. "Look, man, I get it. These roads can be spooky, especially late at night. But ghosts? Come on, that's just a bunch of stories people tell to freak each other out." He turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto mine. "They're not stories." There was something in his voice that made my stomach churn. I tried to laugh again, tried to keep the mood light, but it was like the air in the car had turned cold, sucking the warmth out of the space between us. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, his fingers clenching into fists as he stared out the window again. I needed to change the subject. Something about this conversation was spiraling into a place I didn't want to go. "So, where are you from?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "You got family nearby?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed ahead, his hand shaking more visibly now. His voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the sound of the tires on the road. "You need to turn around." I blinked, glancing at the dark stretch of highway in front of us. "What? Why? Now?" His voice was firmer, more urgent, and his finger trembled as he pointed straight ahead. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "Why? What's up ahead?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, as if he was seeing something in the darkness that I couldn't. "There's something on this road," he whispered, his voice so low I had to strain to hear him. "It's not safe." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The way he said it, with such certainty, sent chills through me. I opened my mouth to ask him what he was talking about, but before I could get the words out, he grabbed my arm, his grip cold and desperate. "Turn around," he shouted this time, his voice cracking with panic. I hit the brakes instinctively, the car jerking slightly as I slowed down, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced. This was insane. What the hell was he talking about? Why was he so scared? I squinted through the windshield, but the road ahead looked the same as it had for miles. Dark, empty, nothing but shadows. But there was something about the way he was acting that made me question everything. His pale face, the tremor in his voice, the urgency in his eyes. It wasn't the kind of fear you could fake. Before I could respond, before I could even think, the car jerked violently. My headlights caught the unmistakable shape of something. No, someone standing in the middle of the road. A figure, tall and shadowy, illuminated for just a second by the sharp beams of light. My reflexes took over. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, tires screeching against the pavement as I swerved to avoid hitting them. For a moment, everything was chaos. The car swerved dangerously close to the ditch on the side of the road, my heart slamming against my chest. I felt the back tires slip on the gravel, the steering wheel jerking out of my hands. I fought to regain control, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel with everything I had. The sound of my own panicked breathing filled the car as I managed to steady the vehicle, bringing it to a shaky stop at the side of the road. I sat there, my hands trembling on the wheel, trying to catch my breath. The night was silent again, the engine idling softly beneath me, but my heart was still pounding in my ears. What the hell had just happened? I stared straight ahead, my mind struggling to process what I'd seen. A person. There had been someone standing in the middle of the road. Right there in front of me. I was sure of it, but it didn't make any sense. Who would be out here, on this desolate stretch of highway, in the dead of night? Instinctively, I turned to my passenger seat, ready to ask the hitchhiker if he'd seen it too. But the seat was empty. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, then to the back seat, scanning the car for any sign of him. But he was gone. The seatbelt lay slack, untouched, as if no one had been sitting there at all. Panic surged through me, a cold chill settling in my bones. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. Asterisk, he was just here. He was sitting right next to me. How could he be gone? Asterisk, I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't seen him get out. It didn't make sense. I looked out the passenger window, my heart hammering against my ribcage, half expecting to see him standing there on the side of the road. But the night was empty, the stretch of highway completely deserted. Just the darkness, pressing in on all sides. A knot of dread twisted in my stomach as I replayed the last few moments in my head. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was my mind playing tricks on me because of how tired I was? But no, I couldn't have imagined it. He had been there. I had talked to him, heard his voice, felt his cold hand grab my arm. And then I remembered the figure in the road. I twisted in my seat, peering back through the rear windshield. The road behind me stretched out, illuminated only by my taillights, the darkness swallowing everything beyond a few feet. I squinted, trying to see if the figure was still there. But there was nothing. No one. The road was empty. My hands were still shaking as I turned back to face forward, my pulse thudding in my ears. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to calm the rising panic. Maybe the hitchhiker had slipped out of the car somehow when I wasn't looking. Maybe he had jumped out when I swerved. But that didn't explain the figure in the road, the one I'd swerved to avoid. And then, just as I was beginning to gather my thoughts, I noticed something. A faint shape, slowly materializing in the fogged-up corner of my windshield. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but as I leaned forward, I could see it more clearly. A handprint, pressed firmly against the glass from the inside. My blood ran cold. I hadn't touched the windshield. I hadn't put my hand there, but someone something had. It was unmistakable. The faint outline of fingers spread out against the fog glass, as if whoever had left it had been sitting right next to me. The same seat that was now empty. I stared at the handprint, my mind racing, a deep sense of dread washing over me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were turning white, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the imprint on the glass. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard it, a low whisper, carried on the wind, so faint I could barely make it out. But I knew what it said. You should have turned around.